Everybody. Continue. Welcome, everybody. I'm so glad you could join us today. Friday, May 1st marked the 30th anniversary for myself and my business. And I must say that 2 months ago, 3 months ago, I would have never guessed this is how I would be spending it, spending this kind of celebratory time or anniversary month, however you want to look at it, um, which is basically working nonstop, very hard, and from my master closet from my house. And would have never dreamed this, but I'm very happy to report that my team and I are all safe and healthy and fully functioning and here to serve you and your families. Fortunately, I didn't realize at the time, but when you get skirted by two hurricanes in 2 years back to back, it helps you prepare for things like this. And for us, that was preparing for our disaster plan and our contingency plan and continuity plan. And I thought that might be with, coming up to my office one day and seeing my building pushed out into Ben Sawyer Boulevard or imploded or whatever it might be, a roof ripped off. And so we had plans in place and to be able to continue to serve you and be able to continue to operate. And I have to say that it's because of that, we were literally able just to unplug our monitors from our offices there at work, bring them to our respective houses and plug in and connect to the internet, and with our VPN log right back into the office. And we have been working as hard as we can, fully functioning, serving our clients ever since day one. I think Mary can correct me, but it must be 8 weeks now that we've been 6, 7, or 8 weeks. We've been working from home, and happy to report that it's going well and everybody is safe. So I like to start off these meetings, or any meeting for that matter, with a positive focus. And so I reached out and asked some people to share some positive things in their life that was going on, and I want to jump right in on that. And one person shared with me that God has blessed me with great health, a healthy family, still have a job and full Social Security. So that's something certainly positive and to be happy about. Someone else shared with me that the COVID has messed up a lot of things in my life, but now I have more downtime to reflect on what's most important to me and reflect on my goals. And I thought this was very key, to have more downtime to reflect on what's important and what the goals are. And the key, making sure those two things are aligned. That's a powerful combination. So good for you on that. And the same person said the result of that was uh, having the courage to start their own business in the midst of this COVID crisis that they believe will expect to be something amazingly powerful for them personally and professionally. So congratulations on that. For us as a team, some of the things we've been doing to try to give back to the community, give back to those that are on the front line, is providing lunches to the doctors, nurses, and staff at Roper Emergency Room downtown and MUSC Emergency Room downtown, and that's been very rewarding. To try to thank those people that are they're literally putting their lives in danger to help us during this time. I'd like to remind everybody that if you have any questions that you thought of before this or you think of during this, please email Mary@cummingswealth.com. Again, that's Mary@cummingswealth.com. Please email those questions to her, and we'll do our very best to either answer them during this webinar if we can, or if not, I promise you we'll get back to you. Some of the questions, especially revolving around the CARES Act and PPP, it's so detail oriented. It may take us a couple of days talking with various CPAs or attorneys to get back to you on that, but we definitely will. So my guest today is a friend of mine, Christian Newton, and Christian is the regional director and vice president for Dimensional Fund Advisors. And DFA, if I could describe it, embraces the philosophy that is the core of my entire investment philosophy. And I've been working with them now about 12 years. And so most of our portfolios that we build have some element of DFA funds within those portfolios. So I invited Christian to join us today and share some perspective. So with that, Christian, I'll turn it over to you. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Bobby. Thanks for giving me a few minutes today, and thank you everybody for joining me. What I'd like to do is just spend a few minutes and give you the perspective that I and my firm, Dimensional, have on everything we've experienced in the last couple of months. Obviously, some very volatile, very dramatic returns in both directions, and maybe try to provide a little bit of perspective, perhaps about what we can expect going forward, and certainly to reflect on sort of the choice that we have as investors, how we choose to bear the uncertainty. That's uncertainty that we're always bearing as investors, but of course, I think right now we're kind of keenly aware of the scope and the color of the uncertainty that's front and center. Now, I do want to get into the nuts and bolts of the markets and returns and so on, but I actually want to start in a way that I wouldn't normally, with just a little bit of personal perspective. I think, again, these extraordinary times benefit from that. So, like Bobby said, he's in his master closet. It looks great. I'm also working under strange circumstances. I'm not in my office. I'm here in the basement of my home in Charlotte, North Carolina. My guess is everyone on this call, in one way or another, has been similarly inconvenienced, and hopefully it's been limited to an inconvenience, of course, as we deal with the coronavirus. Now, my son, of course, is not in school or preschool. He's 4 years old. He's upstairs with my wife. My wife and I are both trying to work. But I actually want to start with something that my son taught me, which I think is kind of useful, a different label for everything that we're dealing with. Just before his school closed, his teachers kind of gave all the students a nickname sort of for the coronavirus and all the changes that were suddenly occurring. And they called it the germ fire, which of course is sort of two ideas that a 4-year-old can appreciate. You wash your hands to protect yourself from germs, and you know what to do in a fire drill. You're going to conduct yourself a little differently in order to protect yourself. So my son taught me that, and I actually really love that label because to me it's a more abstract label that lets me include all of the, some very upsetting and very acute, but all of the weird and strange things that are happening to us. And of course, we're all familiar with what the impact is having on our community, the impact of sort of the mortality and the morbidity, the death and sickness that's occurring in the United States and around the world to varying degrees. But of course, we also know that this has had a huge impact on the economy as a whole, and that in turn has an impact on capital markets. And of course, that's really going to be my focus with you. What's our perspective? What are our expectations when we access those capital markets? And again, I just want to kind of acknowledge the extraordinary, strange set of affairs we're in, where a lot of that economic activity that we expect to tap into when we make an investment, certainly an investment in stocks, maybe an investment in bonds, a lot of that economic activity, of course, as we all are experiencing right now, is frozen or in a state of arrest, at least to some degree. And I think we're kind of just getting into the chapters where we're seeing kind of this living experiment, epidemiological experiment, to some degree an economic experiment, not just at the state to state or city to city level, but also around the world, at how different economies and different communities can hopefully begin to take steps toward something that looks and feels like normal life. Now, again, I just provide this kind of personal introduction simply to acknowledge that even though I will focus on returns and markets and stocks and bonds, I do want to acknowledge that, of course, this is a uniquely human kind of crisis that we're all going through. I sort of think of it as a super slow motion natural disaster. I think we're very accustomed to seeing, often from a distance, a natural disaster occurring, and it tends to strike one place very quickly and very intensely. And then, of course, it's over, and then we can kind of fully assess what the damage was and how we can address it. Sometimes those natural disasters do present challenges to us as investors or challenges to our returns in very specific ways. But of course, here, I think with what I call the germ fire, we're dealing with this uniquely super slow motion and global, call it, if you want to call it, a natural disaster, where again, we're on a very different footing to address it. And again, I think that kind of really brings me to the heart of what I want to share with you, which is to answer, to me, the simplest and most powerful question I can at least hope to provide my perspective, my answer to that question. Is it different this time? Is everything we've experienced in markets these last couple of months, is everything we're about to experience going forward as investors, is this a state of affairs that requires a sudden and dramatic change in our way of viewing markets, in our asset allocation, what we buy, what we hold. I want to answer that really carefully. I actually want to answer it in two ways, not to be capricious, and then to do that, I'm going to share a few slides with you, just a few, to provide a little perspective. Is it different this time? My first answer to that question is yes. I think it is different this time, especially if we put 2020 up against the investment experiences we've had, good or bad, and we're going to focus on the bad like you would expect, in the last 40 or 50 years. So if you have had stock investments over the last couple of months, and I'm guessing all of us have, well, congratulations, you have survived an incredible wave of nearly unprecedented volatility. And we can see how extraordinary that volatility is by looking at these data. So what we're looking at here is the distribution, how frequently we see different daily returns in the stock market. We happen to be looking at the S&P 500 here. So large cap stocks all the way back to 1990 through the end of last year. And like you'd expect, most of those returns are right around zero, on the positive side of zero, like you'd expect. Sometimes zero, sometimes a little negative, but the vast majority of those returns may be positive a quarter of a percent, positive half a percent, maybe up 1%, up 2%, maybe down 1 or 2%. But of course, as you all know, what we have witnessed certainly in February and March were dramatically negative single days, negative days of 5, 6, 7% or more. Also, right alongside, often intermingled with those dramatically negative days, we've also seen positive volatility. So we've seen extraordinary daily returns that we don't frequently see, up 4, 5, 6%. We can even express this at a monthly level, rolling 20 market days together. Everyone, I'm sure, is keenly aware that March was a very negative month for stock returns. April, an incredibly positive month for stock returns. And I think that created a big sense of confusion with a lot of people in the way that the stock market and sort of the headlines and the sentiment and the epidemiology, and again, the sense that there's still more sort of issues and complications, both of the initial disaster and how we address it at an economic level and at a governmental level, continuing to unfold. So you've survived all of that volatility so far. Why is it different? Well, I want to share with you this data just to kind of look at that history of markets, especially focusing on the last 50 or 60 years. We can see the downturns. There's the global market crisis, 1999 and 2000, the technology bubble bursting. We've got Black Monday in there, 1987, and so that stagflationary period of the 1970s, a period when a very safe investment like T-bills was able to outperform the return of stocks. That's how reduced stock returns were during that period for a very long period of time. And I think it is safe to say that 2020 is different in some especially acute ways. And I think maybe looking at 2008 and 2009 is the best way to spotlight that. As I'm sure you recall, if you were an investor at that time, I'm sure you remember sort of what happened in 2008 and 2009. Well, we had this global market crisis. And the real heart of the crisis was, again, some really complex, really levered, really difficult to price investment vehicles, which all of a sudden really couldn't be well priced by the market. The liquidity, that is an availability to buy or sell those derivative instruments, suddenly seized up. And capital markets and investors in capital markets don't like it when they can't easily buy or sell securities. And that sent sort of progressive shockwaves of fear, uncertainty, dismay, uncertainty, amplifying uncertainty, not only in those exotic derivative instruments, but in a lot of the kind of nuts and bolts investments that we rely on, like stocks and bonds, like real estate. And of course, when you have financial institutions whose entire reason for being is to fuel those markets going under, that creates further still concern and uncertainty. And it was certainly a period where there was gross underemployment, a lot of people suddenly out of work, especially in some very particular industries like finance. But I remember in that time, 2008, 2009, I was working at Dimensional. It was definitely a nervous time to be working in the business. But I know a lot of my friends were still gainfully employed, still doing very well, still going out to restaurants, going to ball games, going to basketball games, buying hot dogs, popcorn, and beer at incredible markups. All of that economic activity, the vast majority of that economic activity that we expect every day, still chugging along. And of course, as we all are painfully aware, 2020 is in a way an inversion of that. It's the economic activity that is frozen, largely frozen, and maybe starting to unfold in progressive steps going forward, generating significant uncertainty about what will come next. But I want to argue that I believe capital markets have been functioning very well. And again, that doesn't mean that I stood up and applauded when the stock market suddenly discounted the value of all of my US stock investments by 7 or 8 or 9% in a single market day, even really just a couple of market hours. That's how quickly markets can change their mind, change their perspective on the value of a particular investment. Because, of course, to my mind, that discounting actually made a lot of sense. As we remember at that time, February into March, we were suddenly seeing that this epidemiological crisis, which looked like something that might be very distant and very removed, very abstract to the US marketplace, to the US population, really the developed population around the world, was actually going to be an intense, and at least in our lifetimes, almost everyone's lifetimes, an unprecedented event, and an event that was probably going to require really significant transformation in our day-to-day way of life, how we work, how we recreate, how we get around in society. And I think we've seen that happen. So to me, it made sense that capital markets at that point said, okay, well, probably every business isn't going to quite have the revenue they expected a quarter ago. And there are going to be some businesses, if you're in the cruise business, if you're in the amusement park business, well, your revenue is probably going to be even lower and even slower and even more frozen, probably for a longer period of time. Those industries are going to get discounted even more. So as much as we haven't liked, obviously, to see something like the coronavirus kind of grip the US economy and grip the economies, the developed economies, almost in a uniform way around the world, I would say that capital markets have appropriately been reflecting some of that bad news. Now, that doesn't prevent us from also experiencing sudden positive returns like April, and I'll return to that in a few minutes. So that's my first answer to the question, is it different this time? I think, again, the speed and kind of the velocity of the arresting of economic activity is quite different from all of those other crises. A lot of those other crises were stemming from some particular issue, usually in the macroeconomy or in finance itself. This one is kind of, to me, the reverse. That may make you feel better, it may make you feel worse. I think there's a second way to answer it, which is to say, I don't think it's different this time. I think there are events that we can look at and we can compare the way that the government has responded, the significant transformation of how we carry ourselves every day, certainly changes in the functioning of the economy, changes in the way that government interacts with the economy, changes between labor and management, changes in how we conduct ourselves in our communities and in society as a whole, changes to how we interact with other nations around the world. And really, I think the two best periods to do that are World War II and World War I. So in that sense, I think it isn't different this time. Now, using stakes like that, like essentially existential level world wars, may not feel reassuring, but I actually believe that to be very reassuring, because I have a lot of confidence that the United States is able to undergo a lot of, most of it temporary change, and some of it permanent change, as we'll see, in order to overcome challenges like this. So when I connect the experience we're going through now to World War II and World War I, I'm really focusing on sort of the home front, the changes between how government regulated our day-to-day activity, the availability of energy and resources, the availability of a labor pool enabled in order to make the economy go. For both World War I and World War II, those were significantly transformed. Again, sometimes temporarily, in some ways permanently. But what I want to look at in that period was, what was the perspective, what was the experience of the patient investor, someone hopefully who would exhibit the same philosophical perspective that we as patient investors today, at least we have that choice, the choice to be a patient investor. What kind of investment experience did they have over those time periods? Again, periods of intense geopolitical uncertainty and intense change and tumult in the domestic economy. Well, we can look at World War II right here in this data set. Again, we're looking at the S&P 500 index here, just using it as a proxy for the entire stock market. And we can take this data all the way back to 1926. So we can bracket World War II. And in my imagined investor experience here, we invest in US stocks in 1935, and then we divest 10 years later at the end, at the secession of World War II. So bracketing World War II in a 10-year return, what was that return experience like? Well, in sum, it was a positive return experience. I would say uniquely positive. Why? Because that period of time, that 10 years, delivered an annualized return experience. That is, the average year over that 10 years was 9.5% in an average year. And that's the exact same rate of return, more or less, that we would get if we had invested in the S&P 500 over the entire time period we have. That is an average rate of return, a significantly positive rate of return for an equity investor. Now, as we can see in this chart, if you kind of zoom in on that valuation bar there, it was a significantly volatile time period. It was, the average was positive 9.5%, but the realized annual returns were far from it. Some returns were in excess of 30% up. There are other returns that were in excess of 33% down. 1937 was a dramatically negative year for equity investors. You can see that in the chart. The only way that a patient investor was able to, with fortitude, capture that long-term positive average of 9.5% was to withstand that short-term volatility, to withstand the geopolitical uncertainty, to withstand the significant bad news that we were seeing, at a headline level, a lot of uncertainty for equity investors at that time, even just in domestic U.S. investments. Only by withstanding that could they expect to have that positive return, a positive return that they did realize if they were patient. Now, World War I is, I think, even more interesting to look at. It is harder to look at, however, because the S&P 500 index data has not been taken back to the 19 teens. The only index we can talk about is, in fact, the Dow Jones Industrial Average, the original investing index. And as you probably know, today the Dow Jones is formed of 30 companies. Back in the 19 teens, it was just 12 companies. And again, back then it was kind of the largest mega cap companies, just like we have today. Of course, back then it tended to be heavy industry and railway conglomerates. But again, we can look at a 10-year period bracketing not just the events of World War I, 1914 to 1918, but we can also include the Spanish influenza. As we are all probably very aware, more or less 100 years ago, there was a similarly significant, in fact, far more levels of morbidity and mortality, far more deadly, thankfully, than we're currently experiencing with coronavirus, either here in the US or anywhere in the world. We can also include that global influenza pandemic to take a look at the patient investor's experience. And again, with patients over that 10 years, there was a positive return on the investment. It wasn't 9.5%, it was a little lower, but just looking at that Dow Jones data, it is a positive experience. So again, I think we can look to periods in our history, again, periods where there is significant change between the relationship between government, society, free enterprise, capital markets. Not all of that change feels good at the time. There's certainly big doses of uncertainty. But I would argue, as equity investors, part of what we are being paid to do is bear uncertainty. There's uncertainty that's occurring at a micro level for every company that we hold in a stock position. And of course, there are macro risks that occur at a country and at a global level. And of course, right now we are experiencing waves of that uncertainty. But I would argue that there is a framework wherein we can say, no, it isn't this different this time. And if we are patient investors, if we have an investment plan that allows us to not have to react, we can expect a positive return on capital. And put bluntly, we can expect to achieve the goals that drive our investment plan. Now, I want to pause here. I want to shift gears for just a minute before I approach my conclusion. Again, we wanted to reserve a lot of time for your questions, so hopefully Bobby and I can start to unpack those. But I do want to answer a question that I often get about Dimensional and what Dimensional is doing as a fund manager. Like you would guess, we are still able to access markets. We are able to manage our strategies. We've had in place processes that allow us to respond to natural disasters for 20 years or more. So in a way, this, again, kind of slow motion disaster is one that has definitely put us through our paces, but we're able to manage the portfolios like you would expect we could do as a large fund manager. But the more interesting question to me is a reasonable question, which is, given everything we've seen in volatility, given the uncertainty that we're seeing in how the economy will come back, how quickly that will occur, how violent and fast we've seen unemployment, looking at GDP, taking a look at the revenues that states are losing and the degree to which they're trying to address unemployment insurance and so on. A lot of tumult happening at that economic level. Is Dimensional doing anything different? Is it changing its strategies? Is it getting defensive because of that? And the short answer is we are not. The short answer is we always want to be 100% invested in the asset class to which a particular fund is dedicated. That is, the types of stocks or bonds that a particular fund has a mandate to hold over time. Why is that important? Well, I think this slide answers that question pretty well. It's a thought experiment, and it's all about the kind of impact we have as investors if we miss positive market days, if we miss just one market day. So the thought experiment here is another investment, 1990 to 2019, again invested in the S&P 500. And if we invest $1,000 in January of 1990 and then divest at the end of last year, our terminal wealth has grown, like you would expect, to $17,000. And again, between 1990 and 2020, we experienced a lot of positive years. We also experienced a big battery of negative years, plenty of uncertainty in there. That was the reward for that investment. Now, as a thought experiment, what if we miss just one market day? Out of all about 6,700 market days over that period, what if we miss just one? And that market day happens to be the single best return day over that time period. How is our wealth reduced? Well, you can see in the second column, missing one day reduces our wealth. Our terminal wealth is now worth $15,500. And we can see how missing just a few days, the 5 best, the 15 best days, reduces our wealth by almost 2/3. That's how powerful markets are. That's how quickly prices change in markets. And that's why we want our investments to be fully invested at all times, because we don't want to miss out on those days where the market is up. Our belief is markets are so competitive, markets are so cost effective, markets are available to so many counterparties that you don't get a postcard ahead of time. You can't take one newspaper headline and immediately with confidence translate that to positive or negative market returns on a single market day. And we don't want to have a forecast going forward. One reason is we don't think it's effective. We think it's a way to reduce your returns over time. But maybe the even more powerful reason is we don't believe it's necessary. We believe you can set up your investments, be fully invested with an investment plan. That does mean in the short term, sometimes in the medium term, you do realize negative returns, but you don't react because you want to keep that portfolio set up to harness all of the positive returns. And the idea that we always get a green light before those positive returns show up, simply not borne out by the data. So I want to hit my conclusion here and simply to kind of spotlight the choice that I think we all have as investors. Now, I think we know intuitionally why it is we invest in stocks, maybe over alternatives. It's because there's a higher expected return. After all, we're investing in a piece of a company, and whatever that company might do, that company might be successful, it might be unsuccessful. We have a future claim on all of its future revenue, all of its future growth or success. Now, looking at this data, this is sort of the widest angle lens view I can give you on, to me, why we invest in capital markets at all. And again, we're looking at the growth of investments starting way back at the beginning of the data set, 1926, to the end of last year. And we can see a $1 in 1926 today costs $14. Put another way, I'd have to spend $14 today to get a tuna fish sandwich that cost $1 in 1926. That's the role of inflation. As we know, inflation tends to decay the buying power of our capital. And that's, of course, why we make investments, right? Sometimes we make investments simply to preserve that buying power. And if I lend my money to the federal government for 30 days, a T-bill, well, you can see that I can beat inflation and beat it pretty handily simply by taking on the risk of not controlling my assets for 30 days. That's essentially what a T-bill feels like. And it makes sense to me if I extend that period of time, same creditor, the federal government, to 10 years or 15 years or even 30 years, I in turn get a higher return. Why do I expect a higher return? Well, because of course now I'm dealing with a larger time frame, not 30 days, but thousands of days. So it makes sense that I should be compensated for the uncertainty of everything that's going to happen in that time frame, good or bad. And that in turn, of course, brings us to stock investments, where again, we know there's a long-term positive reward for that investment, but we also know, and we're seeing it right now, it means withstanding short-term periods where prices change and can change violently. You can see just in the behavior of this line chart how that valuation of stocks changes way more rapidly than the valuation of a T-bill. And we should expect that, because that stock gives us access to way more possible return, and in turn exposes us to more risk, more loss of principal. And so with the benefit of hindsight, it's really easy to look at a period like 2008 and 2009 right there and see that rapid drop in prices, and to remember how fearful we were, because no one knew at that time when we would find a floor, when we'd get our feet back under us, when we'd have confidence in capital markets again, when all of those shock waves, all of that discounting was shot through markets, and we can return to a growth, an optimistic, a growth footing. We didn't know when it was going to happen, but I think almost all of us expected that it would happen, and indeed it did happen. And I think if you think back to the headlines that you saw in 2009 and 2010 and 2011, a lot of them were still very gloomy. A lot of them were still very focused on all of the uncertainty, all of the risk that the government was now taking on to address problems in capital markets. I don't have to point out the mirror effect that has on what we're looking at, what we're absorbing in the news right now. A similar set of unfolding circumstances, a similar set of uncertainty, and a similar set of concern about kind of what will be the bill to taxpayers for all of the work the federal government is doing to support capital markets. But I would argue in our current crisis, a lot of it, of course, is more directly supporting direct economic activity, employment, medium and small size businesses, and so on. So with the benefit of hindsight, we can see how in these periods when markets really want to discount assets because of a medium-term risk, it's very tempting to get out. But my perspective is, if we are disciplined investors, we are rewarded for staying in. I want to close with one more story, if you'll give me the time. I think it's oddly apropos, especially given the incredible professional commitment and heroism of first responders and doctors and nurses and medical professionals in helping us to address coronavirus and hopefully get us set to defeat coronavirus more or less in the next couple of years. At least that's what I'm rooting for. I'm sure you'll all agree with me there. Well, a good friend of mine that I knew in college went on to medical school and became a doctor. And a few years ago, she shared this story with me from her residency, and I want to share it with you. So as you know, the way you get into good medical school, like my friend did, is you are really good at book learning. You're just great at absorbing everything we know, and when you're in college, about chemistry, biology, physics, how the human body works. And even in medical school, a big chunk of medical school is still yet more book learning. All of the evidence, all of the history about everything we know about how the human body works and how disease works in the human body. If you can get through all that, and if you're good at book learning, only then do they put a cadaver in front of you and you open up the human body. And assuming you can handle that, and not everybody can, well, then you eventually graduate from medical school and you begin your residency in a medical program, in a hospital, in a medical office. And every medical student gets their residency at the same time in August of every year. It's when you're assigned to one hospital. And of course, that's why the old doctor's joke is, don't get sick in August. Because of course, what do you have? Well, you have this whole new class of very smart, very talented new physicians, but they don't yet have the experience and wisdom that comes with time. So my friend's story is from her residency. And when you're a resident, you do rotations. So you study and you kind of sample all the different fields of medicine that are available to you, and if you want to pursue a specialty. And for her, the scariest rotation was easily the emergency room. And in the emergency room, she remembered the first night she was in the emergency room, the attending physician brought all the residents together and said, in the emergency room, for the first time ever, you're going to be confronted by patients who are traumatized, who are maybe unconscious, who may be in altered states, who may be drunk, who may be violent. And you're going to want to have an adrenaline response to that. That's why here in the ER, we have a special watchword. Don't just do something, stand there. If you react to the first piece of medical evidence you get, the first lab result, the first thing that the patient presents, and you react only to that, you can kill a patient really quickly in the ER. Don't just do something, stand there. We want to work as a team to get the preponderance of evidence, put that evidence to work. We want to get as many lab results as we can get. We want to talk to the patient as much as we can before we determine a course of action, even an emergency course of action. Don't just do something, stand there. And I truly believe that story, I think, is illustrative for us as investors. We have a choice. We have an investment plan. And if that investment plan gives us confidence that we can, in a short or even medium term, even over several years, withstand sideways or negative returns because our investment plan has built in that expectation, most often, I think for most of us, the best advice is don't just do something, stand there. And the other reason I share that story with you is, to me, again, the same way that we look to a physician for their experience, for their wisdom. But the other great thing about a physician is their objectivity, right? Our health is not their health. They are not existentially involved. So their perspective can give us a lot of value. And I think we see the same thing with financial advisors. Now, Dimensional is a large asset manager. We're proud to be a top 10 asset manager if you just count assets under management. Among the other 9 firms that we compete with, all household names. We are unique among those other firms in that we have no retail distribution. We do not accept a cashier's check from a stranger to own one of our mutual funds. The only way to get a mutual fund from Dimensional is through an advisor, through a professional, independent, fee-based intermediary, because we believe their wisdom, their knowledge, their objectivity about your investment plan and about your goals is that valuable. And I think that it's acutely valuable in times like this, when the uncertainty that we always know we are bearing as investors is just so front and center and so aware of it, and it's penetrating so many different parts of our life. So with that, I will see if Bobby is still out there. Hopefully he's stuck with us for those 30 minutes and see if there are any questions or any other perspective that we could share.
All right. So Mary, do we have any questions at this time? And if anybody does have any questions that anything Christian went over prompted any, please, again, email mary@cummingswealth.com, mary@cummingswealth.com, and we'll be happy to answer them. Christian, great job. That was really a great perspective, a great walk back through time. There's been that period in World War II, the volatility in there was unbelievable. I mean, I hadn't studied that period of time so close. Of course, I've seen this chart many, many times. So that's the first time I really dug deep into that. I mean, the volatility in those 10 years was absolutely amazing. And I will say, when I was looking at that, one thing that came into my mind, one of the true benefits for investors is, guess what? They didn't really know it, because they didn't have iPhones that told you when the world was going to end, like,
Right.
with ours, with the news feed going beep, 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 beep of all the information. I mean, literally, it's just amazing how many times I see, older people, I'll call it that, come into my office and maybe still have stocks and stock certificates, and they'll just share the story that, we just did it over time. We just did it over, my granddad bought these, he passed them to my dad, and it just works so well over time. But a part of it is just not knowing that volatility, because you don't panic if you don't know, how bad things are. So I'm convinced that that helps some people stay the course and
Yeah,
stick.
absolutely. I mean, we talk about it all the time, that there's so much information that's available to all of us, not only as our investors, but every other, part of our life. Of course, the question is, what's more valuable, wisdom or information? And to me, wisdom is sort of a filter for information. It's only the stuff that I really need to know that really matters. And again, being able to separate wisdom and information that's a full-time job for all of us.
That is for sure, for sure. All right, so Kristen, if you will stop sharing your screen, I think
Sure
uh,
can.
I can pop mine back on from the beginning. Okay. All right. So our theme behind the scenes today, and has been through this webinar series that we've been doing every week for several weeks now, and plan to continue to do into the foreseeable future, and hopefully things will get a little more back to normal. And this has been so well received by so many people, we might continue doing it on a monthly basis when things again settle down a bit. But for the meantime, well, we're here for you, and we'll keep these up. So the theme of beach balls, traffic, and sunscreen may seem a little crazy when you're talking about investing, but I'll just touch on some of the thought process there. And this slide here does a great job of describing the beach ball theory.
Hey,
And
Bobby, will you reshare your screen for us, please?
oh, thank you so much, Mary. What in the world would I do without you? So let's go here and there, and I'm one click away. Boom. There we go. All right. And Mary, if I don't have it, let me know. So again, the beach ball, traffic and sunscreen analogy. And so this slide that Kristen even used, does a great job of explaining this. And so with the stock market, you can relate to it like a beach ball in water, or a beach ball in a pool or in the ocean. So we've all, I would imagine most people have with yourselves many years ago, or with your kids, played with a beach ball at the beach or in a pool. And if you push it underwater, uh, and you push it a little way underwater, you let it go, it bounces up. And then the question is, well, what happens when you push it, a long ways underwater? And back here in 2009 was a great example of that, where if you push the beach ball to say down to the level of your knees, which this looks like in that scenario, and let go of it, not only does it come back to the surface, but it comes shooting back up. Watch this if I can. Yeah. So it comes shooting back up, as you can see here, highlighted by the returns that we've had in these last several years. Um, so let's see here. Then this slide I like to share because it shows, the aftermath, so to speak. And there's been so many times in our lifetime and over history where there's been reasons to panic and reasons to not want to invest. And this shows the many of the crises in our most recent lifetime. And here we go back to the crash in '87. And this shows a 60-40 stock bond portfolio, and the return 1 year from the bottom, and 3 years from the bottom, and then 5 years from the bottom. And you can see how resilient the market is. This is just just 60% in stocks, and after '87, this portfolio would have earned a 76% return over that following 5-year period of time. So investors that stuck with this pain of feeling and seeing your assets go down in value, have been rewarded by the market returning and coming back. And you can just see it time and time again, throughout these crashes, of how resilient the market is over time, and how investors that are rewarded for staying the course. Christian and I, in preparing for this today, we're talking about various things in the market and in the world, and he used that analogy of pain. You have to you have to go through pain to get the higher returns that equity markets, that stock markets, and all asset classes within the market deliver. But it does reward those people that stick with it. So let's see here if I can. All right. So the next slide, back to our beach balls, traffic, and sunscreen. This slide is one that many advisors use, and I've used with many of my clients, many of you over the years. And we call it the Skittles chart. You can see why. If you always say, if you opened up a bag of Skittles and dumped them on your conference room table, this might be what it looks like. And so what this represents is the returns of various asset classes each calendar year over the last 10 years back to 2010. And it shows each of these buckets of money. Now, for I can say with certainty, all of my clients are diversified across almost every one of these. And when I say almost, those of you that are young, or because of the position can afford to be more aggressive, may not have much in the bond category here. But for the most part, most clients, we have your money spread out over every one of these, and that's diversification. And so what this chart shows each year, it shows the highest returning bucket of money, asset class, all the way down to the lowest. And so in 2010, the highest return was from small cap growth stocks, and the lowest return was money market, anywhere from a 0% return on up to a 30%. So you can imagine, investors that say were in a portfolio that was, instead of small company stocks, it was in large company stocks. And in this case, large cap value, they earned a 15% return. Well, 15%, back to what Christian was saying, that's 150% higher than the 70-year average of the stock market. But it never fails that when someone earns 15% and something else earns 30, they wish they'd have been in that 30. And I will tell you, as your advisor, oh, how I wish I had that crystal ball, but I'm sorry, I don't. So I have to do things to try to deliver what I believe to be the highest expected rate of return going forward, and a prudent fiduciary plan, which is diversification. So again, imagine, this year and every year is a prime example of that. So the example of the Skittles chart ties into the traffic theory. So, if you're on a 4-lane highway and you're rolling along at 62 miles an hour, and traffic comes to a complete stop in your lane, and the next lane over is going 20 miles an hour because of something up ahead, invariably you're going to see somebody out in front of you that jumps over to that lane that's still rolling, and here they go. And they may take off, and you might not be able to see the taillights for a while, and then inevitably you catch back up to that person and you go past them, and then you may see later on they jump over to this lane, and it goes on up, and then they're coming back. And so asset allocation can work the same way, and investors are tempted to jump into that other lane, right? So if you're in these ones that are performing down on the bottom, it's just human nature and so tempting to jump into the ones that are doing better. And so I picked small cap value just because it's a blue color here. It's easy to kind of track. But look at 2010. Say somebody at the end of 2010 is looking to invest, and they're like looking at the returns and like, wow, 24%, that's pretty good. I'm going to put my money there. And they put their money in January of 2011. Well, where is small cap value on the chart? Wait a minute, where I'm looking here, I don't see it. It did so well last year. Where is it? Uh-oh, going down, up, -5. So here we are, 24% one year and down 5% the next year. And what happens is investors that do this, that would go all into one of these, would likely be tempted to go, okay, well, I made a bad move and I'm gonna make up for it. So I'm gonna sell small cap value and I'm gonna buy mid cap value because it was the best. And look what happened the next year. Small cap value was up 18%. And I haven't planned this out because I'm picking these as I go. Where is mid cap value? Oh, mid cap, small cap value up 18, up 34 back to back. Mid cap value in this place, not bad, but not the best. So you see what's going on here, and then small cap value down 4, and then, oh, this isn't fun anymore. I'm going to get out, and maybe they got out here. Oh goodness, I'm glad I got out of that. And then the next year it's up 34% or 31%. So the point of the Skittles chart, as you can see here, there's just no pattern to it. It's so random, and we never know which one of these asset classes are going to perform the best. So what we do in your portfolio, this is very high tech investment strategy I'm about to share with you here. So many of you have heard about my bucket strategy. So here's another high tech strategy where instead of a bucket, we're going to be talking about an ice cube tray. So remember the ice cube tray, right? Back when you used to have to fill them up and put them in the freezer. Kristen's laughing because he doesn't know what I'm talking about. He's too young.
I am not that young. No, I'm not. I know exactly what an ice cube tray is. Continue.
Okay. So back to the analogy of the ice cube tray. So we know that markets are efficient over time, and we know we want to be diversified. So what we do in your portfolio is we're going to fill up. We're going to put water in every cube of that ice cube tray, but then we're going to tilt it and tilt it and tilt it to where we have a little higher levels of water in the areas in these asset classes that have done what? That have done the best over time. Now, I didn't say they're going to be the best each and every year back to back and every year forever, that have done the best over time. And what that does is it gives us a diversified portfolio that gives us a chance to have higher expected returns than just owning the market weight and just having the water level equal in those buckets. So, or in those ice cube trays. So that's what we're doing. That's what we're doing here to diversify, to have your money spread out across all of these areas, all these asset classes, and then we're really scientifically, right? Christian, scientifically there, yeah, based on 5 decades of Nobel Prize winning academic research, not Wall Street, but academic research. We're tilting it to the areas that have done the best over time. And then, one of our main jobs as your advisor is to keep you from changing lanes, because man, I got to tell you, it's so tempting to do it. It is so tempting to do it, but it's not the right thing to do over the long haul. So that's our traffic theme. Don't be jumping lanes when it comes to investments. And then let's see here. Whoops, hit the next button. Boom, boom, boom. I like to touch on this one in times of volatility. It goes back to some of the things that Christian was showing, and what this shows is the return of the market, of the stock market over the period of time from 1980 to the end of 2019. And what the bars are is the return of the market for the year, and what the dots are the low points of the market, what we call the intra-year decline throughout the year. And so what I like to use this for is to show, you can see if you just count up the number of bars that are up versus the number down, thankfully, there's a lot more up than down. As we know, markets are very efficient over a long period of time. But I also know and tell my clients often is they're very inefficient in a short period of time. And so you can see just how many years throughout the calendar year, the market was actually negative at some point in the year. It might have been for 6 days, it might have been for 6 months. But if you kind of take a walk through history here, you're at one point you're down 13%, but ended the year even. The next year you're down 8%, but ended the year up 12, or down 8 and ended up 27. You can just see it time and time again. Even here where it ended down, you were down 20, but it ended 7. And this speaks to so many things in behavioral finance, and how hard and how tempting it is to not stay the course. But you can see the impact if you were to say, and say in this year, right here, down 6%. I'm getting out. I can't take it anymore. And it went from down 6 to up 26. It's just a huge creation of wealth that you missed. And it goes back to that, if you missed that one day in the market, well, if this was a 4-month period of time and you got out when it was, down 4, and you thought you were great because you got out at down 4 and it was down to 6. And next thing you know, in the next 35, 45, 50 trading days, it's up 20. You missed that train. It's just so hard to time it. So I like sharing this slide because it just speaks to really how volatile the market is. Christian, my new word, back to the pain of volatility. We're getting in stocks, you're getting compensated to be uncomfortable. You're getting compensated to take risk, because going back to the line graph over time, you can be safe in treasury bills, but you're not going to grow your wealth from a purchasing power standpoint that dramatically. So, the equities, you're certainly signing up for risk and volatility, and we're experiencing that pain now. But we're here for you. If anybody has any questions about this or any concerns about their portfolio, please reach out to us, and we'll be more than happy to help you on a one-on-one basis. So let's see here. All right. So beach balls, traffic, sunscreen. We covered the first two. So the sunscreen theory is to be proactive, and because I say it so many times, I've said it so many times in my career, that there's so much in the world of investing and finance and the economy that's just totally out of our control. Now you throw the medical component into that. There's just so much that's out of our control. So you have to control the things that you can. And we've talked with you about those things over the years of, controlling your diversification and your discipline, and controlling taxes and things along those lines, or managing those things. But the sunscreen is things to be, is speaking to the fact that, we can't control the sun's out every day, and thank God it is most of the time. But we can protect ourselves, and that's protecting yourselves through the sunscreen. In the world of investing, and in your financial world and in your portfolio, that protecting yourself comes from diversification, right? So we want to make sure that your portfolios are diversified. So those of you that we manage your individual private wealth, we have, in most cases, your portfolio is spread out over 9,000 stocks, 40 different countries, 18 different currencies, very, very well diversified. Gosh, Christian, I wish we had some more time to share with them some of the history that we were talking about earlier of companies like, this company where you've got this thing in your pocket and you can take pictures and share them with people and everything. And you're like, well, you would think that's Apple, right? Well, no, that was Polaroid and Kodak that developed the digital technology 3 decades ago and thought it was a waste of time and didn't pursue it. And along came Apple, so I mean, it's just, there's so many stories historically that we could share with you. But from the standpoint of being diversified and spreading it out, and then having a bear market bucket, and that's, depends on your age and how much direct income you have. But as you get closer to retirement or in retirement, it's having that bear market bucket, that bucket that really can't go down, or if it can, it can't go down much. That's your safe, really safe and short-term bonds. That's money in the bank, things like that. Gosh, so many times over the last 3 or 4 years, I've had so many clients that want, how that money I have in the bank, shouldn't I maybe invest it because the market was going up? I'm like, no, you got to stick to the discipline. You never know. And sure enough, thank goodness, the conversations I'm having with y'all now about how beneficial it is and how much peace of mind it gives people to know that in many cases can go 2, 3, 4 years without having to sell a stock to derive their retirement income. So having that bear market bucket is key, and really shining in today's world. Sticking with a disciplined long-term plan, again, not trying to time of getting in and getting out and panicking. And then one of the great ways that you can really take advantage of what's going on now, for those of you with home mortgages, I just got a blip today from one of the market apps on my phone. Mortgage rates just super, super low. So for those of you that have loans on your commercial office buildings or commercial property, rental property, your primary mortgage, I really encourage you, to reach out to your lenders and see what you can do as far as refinancing. The rates are really, really great right now. And then those of you that have excess cash on hand, this will likely be, looking back, one of those great events where there was an opportunity to buy low. And if I can go back here, if I can figure out how to go backwards, maybe I can. Maybe I can't. Huh. So, back to here, you just look back at how, how much wealth is created after market events like this. And, I don't know where the end is. So we're implementing different strategies based upon each individual needs. But if you have excess cash on hand and you want to talk about investing it now, it'll likely prove to be one of the best times to do so. If not today, in the next, coming months. Let's see here. And so, um, and then back to people that are, still working, one of the best things you can do is through your company retirement plan is continuing to that payroll deduction. Most of you on the call, I'm sure you've heard the term dollar cost averaging, and that basically says, if this fund was a great buy at $20 a share and it's down to 15 and you're putting in the same dollar amount, you're actually going to buy more shares. So dollar cost averaging forces you to buy more shares while the market's down, and take advantage of that. So continue that discipline through, and even increase if you can afford to increase your contributions there. In the words of Warren Buffett, he said, every 10 to 15 years, if we are lucky, and he emphasized, if we're lucky, the economic skies will turn dark and it will briefly rain gold. And in the last couple of months, it's been some a time period where it's really been raining gold, and a lot of opportunity to take advantage of. I know there's a lot of pain and carnage with what we're going on from the health event side, but from the economic event side, there's been some good opportunities to take advantage of. And just remember, America is not going out of business. So let's see here. So in closing, I want to thank you for attending today. Mary, if we did get any questions, just let me put my phone here. Shoot me a text, Mary. Let me know if we've got any questions so I can, and then email that question to me, Mary, so we can address it if we have any. But in closing, I want to thank everybody for attending today. I hope you found it a beneficial use of your time. I must say that despite being unhappy for the reason that we're in this position, the experience for me and my team has really been invigorating. Uh, Serving you as our clients, it's just such a rewarding thing, and helping so many people take advantage of the opportunities that have been presented here and protect themselves for the uncertainty. Runs the gamut, but it's really been invigorating, and it's truly our blessing to be of service to you and your family. We've just been working. I don't want to blow our own horn, but my gosh, we've just been working so hard. Uh, we have a spreadsheet that I don't know how many tabs it has now. It's like, here's what we need. Here's what we need to do for these people. The market goes up. Here's what we need to do for these people. The market goes down. Here's what we need to do for these people that are taking their required minimum distributions. Here's what we need to do for those that have already taken the required minimum distribution. It's just so much, but it's been really invigorating, and we're thrilled to be able to be here for you and serve you and your family. And remember, if there's anybody, friends or family that you care about, that needs some help, needs some guidance, please reach out to us, send them our way. We're never too busy to help somebody that you care about. And so again, I'm at this 30-year mark in my business career. It's humbling to look back and think through it all, and the trust and confidence that all of you have placed in us for all these years. Just so humbled, so grateful for that. And again, I would have never thought I'd be standing and laughing as I'm looking around in my master closet amongst my shirts and shoes and everything. But it really does make me proud to know that me and my team are here to serve you. So thank you so much. God bless you. God bless your loved ones. And please reach out to us if there's anything we can do to help you. Have a great day.